Hey everyone, my name is Wedge and we finally have the first tournament results for Guild's Ravnica Standard. In today's video, we're looking at one of the most dominant strategies in the new format, Selesnya tokens. If you're ready to dive into new Standard and want to know what to expect, this video is for you. Do hope you enjoy it, and if you do, remember hit that like button right down there, it helps out a lot. Like buttons. Selesnya tokens is pretty self-explanatory, a green-white deck that focuses on going as wide as possible on the ground and overwhelming the opponent with superior numbers. First, let's talk about the crazy amount of creatures this deck can produce. This strategy includes a pair of Tristani Discordant. This is the perfect card to start with because it says it all. Tristani comes down with two other creatures and pumps your entire team with a nice +1/+1 blanket. Once Tristani has entered the battlefield, everything changes. You get the tokens even if Tristani is removed, and it demands a removal spell right away because antheming a team that's designed to go wide, pretty dang good. Remember, the name of the game is Mass Creatures. Legion's Landing is at the bottom of our curve, and it makes perfect sense why. For a single white mana investment, you get a 1/1 with lifelink that's perfect in the early game if your opponent is slow on the draw, and flipping it by attacking with 3 creatures, easy as heck in a token deck. Adanto the First Fort's crazy strong, letting you mass more lifelinkers every time you have extra mana to work with. It can help keep you alive against other aggro decks, or chump block something huge while gaining a bit of life. A lot of reach in this card, it's quite good. Probably the card that generates the most tokens, Saproling Migration, is obviously in this deck as a playset. You can drop it early for a pair of tokens or late for quads. It's important to get as many tokens onto the battlefield as soon as possible. Legion's Landing into the Migration means that you can trigger the landing the very next turn without blockers in your way. That's pretty efficient. Anyways, not a super exciting card, but necessary for this deck. Now, speaking of necessary, if you want this strategy to be top tier, you have to include History of Benaglio. You just do. The card's incredibly strong, and it has come down a bit in price from its original spike, which is nice, but regardless, this card does a lot of work. It brings 2 2/2 vigilance creatures out over 2 turns, and then it pumps them to high heaven for a sweet attack. Even if you don't get the pump out of the deal, having 2 2/2 vigilance tokens for 3 mana, good enough for this deck easily. Next up is Thorne Lieutenant. This elf warrior is already pretty well known thanks to the elf deck, but is also quite good here. Being able to gain value on every removal spell thrown at it is huge. In this deck, you're looking to get as many creatures onto the battlefield as possible. So if you can replace the Lieutenant with a 1/1, most of the time, that's actually going to be just fine, believe it or not. I'll explain in a minute, but you get the idea. This is strong because it replaces itself against spot removal. It's a nice include. Now, we're obviously running a lot of ways to purely create tokens. We have to take advantage. What makes this deck powerful isn't how fast it can mass little creatures, it's how efficiently the deck can use those mass creatures to do powerful things. Arguably, the biggest payoff in this entire deck is March of the Multitudes. You want to talk about a win condition? My goodness, this card's an absolute nightmare. Not only is it instant speed, but it convokes, which basically means each creature you tap is going to create another 1/1 with lifelink. That's right, they all have lifelink. This card is mythic worthy for a reason. After the initial 3 mana investment, which really isn't anything, you're going to double up your board at the very least with a bunch of lifelinkers, game winning. Imagine this and Tristani at the same time. It's brutality, just wow, it's insane. Let's abuse our mass creatures with some more Convoke, shall we? Venerated Loxodon is one of the most powerful spells in Guilds of Ravnica, and I think it's weird that he's been overlooked thus far. In this deck, the Loxodon is a monster. Convoking means that you'll almost never have to pay for this card, and when you do convoke, you give counters to everything. Okay, this means that if you 100% convoke the Loxodon, it's going to bring 9 power and toughness to the board for 5 tapped creatures. 9 power! That rate of return is nearly unmatched in any deck in Standard. The value is incomprehensibly good and will quickly get out of control, leaving your opponent with just nothing they can do. It's kind of absurd. Not even done with this on-theme token generation. While not as immediately impactful as the Loxodon or the March, Amara, Soul of the Accord, was very literally made for this deck as her only purpose is to tap. By being here and dropping early, each convoke spell you cast is more 1/1 lifelinker value. She's the perfect curve filler at 2 mana, demands a removal spell, or you'll have an engine of 1/1s forever. She's honestly great for this strategy, think about it. Either she gets down early and absorbs a removal spell you'd rather have on her than Tristani, or she lives and grants you an army. It's kind of a win-win. As with many creature-based decks, vulnerability to Settle the Wreckage is pretty great, like it's real large. Good thing the deck includes Shalai, Voice of Plenty. With Shalai out, Settle the Wreckage does absolutely nothing. Shalai is a great protector for your team against the best board wipe in the format, and better yet, she has a bomb mana sink late game that can break a board stall or give you the right amount of pressure to get through. Shalai is hugely important here, always run her, too much value to say no. Really no way to sugarcoat this. Lyra Dawnbringer is in this deck as a 1-up, and yeah, she's real, super real. A lot of mono red is still running around, and they are not dealing with her well. Sure, this is a tokens deck, but having a 5/5 flying first strike lifelink angel is basically like having Baneslayer Angel back, and that thing just went into every deck that could run it. Lyra really is no different. She's broken as a card, crazy powerful, and running her just adds another question for your opponent to answer. Most of the time, they can't, and you just win the game. Even when they can, they have the rest of your token horde to deal with too. It's a fantastic deck. Speaking of win conditions, Flower and Flourish is in the strategy. Now, Flower is obviously great early game for mana fixing and making sure you hit your land drops. It's great, and I'm sure you will use that a fair amount of the time. But if you don't get the split card early in the game, Flourish becomes a win condition. +2/+2 to your entire team, and most of them have lifelink. If that doesn't win you the game straight away, it at least puts you in a position to survive and win further down the road. Solid split card with double utility we could use in the early or late game. This is why I like split cards. Great versatility here. Conclave Tribunal is one of the best removal spells in the format right now, and having it in this deck is like having a free top tier removal spell. It comes with Convoke in case mana is being rough with you, and enchantment removal isn't exactly the highest priority right now. Plus, your job is to mass creatures and attack. Your opponent does not have the time to focus on all of your creatures and your one enchantment in the deck. More often than not, the Tribunal will go unchecked the entire game. Play this card, it's friggin' great. The deck only needs 22 lands because half of it is Convoke and the other half is pretty cheap. Playsets of Sunpetal Grove and Temple Garden are obvious includes, sitting next to a single Arch of Orazca because Ascending is going to be easier for this deck than basically any other, and if you do get wiped out or need to rebuild or just need more gas, the draw ability is a solid mana sink and great way to refuel in the late game. Add on 9 plains and 4 forests and boom, list is complete. Selesnya tokens relies on the ability to mass creatures as fast as possible and then put a ton of pressure on the opponent while gaining incremental life advantage with your 1/1 life-linking tokens. The deck has a singular focus, and that's to go wide, then benefit from doing so. Prioritize getting creatures on the board early. I'm talking Saproling Migration, Legion's Landing, Amara, History of Benaglio. Make sure you have things to do early game or you'll be too slow in building up your board. Then don't be afraid to drop Tristani or the Loxodon or use a March. If you spend the entire game afraid of a board wipe, you'll let the opponent catch up, and you can't have that. Sometimes they'll just have it, and that's part of Magic. Sometimes you'll have Shalai, and you'll beat Settle the Wreckage. That's Magic the Gathering. Drop everything you can as fast as you can, and keep the pressure up. Don't sacrifice tokens for no reason, make smart attacks, and you got this. This deck does a lot on its own, so let it take you for a ride. Now let's look at the sideboard. There were multiple versions of the deck this past weekend, a plethora of them, so I'm going to cover the best overall sideboard options based on what we've seen so far. Seal Away, Shieldmare, and Knight of Autumn are solid against aggressive strategies, disrupting their tempo and giving you more time to work with. Dawn of Hope and Vivian Reed give you a lot more reach in the late game against control variants, games that end up being a grind if they keep wiping you or disrupting you, and Lyra Dawnbringer is simply a bomb against a lot of mid-range strategies as well as some aggressive strategies that can't win too early. Think of bringing this in with Seal Away, difficult to remove without hard removal. Selesnya tokens is one of the best decks in New Standard right now. Players have been fiddling with it for a while, and this version of the deck is optimized pretty well for what Standard is at this very moment. If you enjoy a token strategy and want to play a top tier deck at FNM or even higher level events, you cannot go wrong with this deck. It masses creatures quickly, has plenty of win conditions, and is durable through a lot of nonsense. Selesnya tokens is strong. If you want to see the entire list, it's in the first link in the description. And stay tuned for more New Standard coverage as the week goes on. And finally, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. This video is brought to you in part by TCGplayer.com. Guilds of Ravnica is finally out, which means I could talk about things other than boxes. You enjoy this deck? If you do, Venerated Loxodon is something you're going to need real bad. Good news is that the Bomb Convoke monster is only $1.50 right now on TCG Player. Again, if this deck is something you're interested in, I don't think the Loxodon is going to be cheaper than it is right now. $6 for a playset. Click the link on the screen if you want to get in on this goodness. It helps the channel. Win-win. Enjoy.